Fred Rogers was an inspirational television personality who inspired countless children, and his long-running program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, will continue to educate young people for many generations to come. Here's the amazing truth about Mr. Rogers. For much of his career, Mr. Rogers was in high demand as an interview subject, but he was also considered a rather tough person to interview. Why? Well, he was just so gosh darned nice.
You don't set out to be rich or famous. What you set out to do is to be helpful.
You see, the friendly and curious demeanor we saw in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood wasn't an act. He was literally that friendly, on screen and off. That made him nearly impossible to interview because he'd often steer the conversation wildly off course while trying to befriend the person interviewing him. Getting Rogers to open up and talk about himself was exceptionally hard because he was always more interested in how his interviewer was doing. Rogers often had a profound effect on the people who interviewed him. He would end the conversation by telling the interviewer that he enjoyed meeting them and then give them a little photo album of the time they'd literally just spent together.
What I love to take are pictures of people's faces.
Rogers was even known to call up interviewers years after the fact just to see how they were doing. Fred Rogers took exceptionally good care of himself. He didn't smoke or drink, and he adhered to a strict vegetarian diet, and not just for health reasons. He would often say that, "I don't want to eat anything that has a mother." Rogers also had an exercise regimen that would be punishing for a young man, let alone a guy in his 60s and 70s. He'd wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and swim for several hours before praying and starting work. Rogers' morning ritual involved looking at his bathroom scale, seeing the number 143, and smiling to himself. Mr. Rogers thought 143 was a very special number because he found a special pattern in it. As Won't You Be My Neighbor director Morgan Neville explained to CNBC,
to him, 143 was a kind of a private numerology that meant 143, I love you.
That's because, as Fred Rogers explained, it takes one letter to say I and 4 letters to say love and 3 letters to say you, 143. As the story goes, Rogers woke up one morning, saw that he weighed 143 pounds, and decided he'd do everything in his power to be reminded of love every morning. He apparently succeeded. According to the Fred Rogers Center, he kept his weight at 143 pounds for 30 years. At the height of his fame, Mr. Rogers received a lot of fan mail, and he wanted to answer it all. It's often claimed that he answered every single piece of fan mail he ever received, which is rather hard to believe. After all, he must have received thousands of letters in his lifetime. How could such a busy man possibly answer each one? But it sounds like he really did write back to each and every letter. And far from being generic niceties or canned responses, his replies were deeply heartfelt and personal. He let his fans know just how much their messages meant to him, making sure to say he was proud of them and very happy that they were friends. Francois Clemens played the resident cop in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was initially hesitant to take on the role after being approached by Rogers. As he told NPR, "I grew up in the ghetto. I did not have a positive opinion of police officers. I really had a hard time putting myself in that role, so I was not excited about being Officer Clemens at all." Clemens eventually accepted the role and became one of the first African-American men to have a recurring role on a children's television show. In the 2018 documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, he says,
"There were black kids watching the show. They needed a black figure who would not let them down."
In one early episode, Mr. Rogers invited Clemens to soak his feet in his pool alongside his own. Today, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but this episode aired in 1969, back when segregated swimming pools were still very much a thing. Clemens was moved by the gesture and the symbolism of showing a black man and a white man as equals. Rogers and Clemens remained friends for life, and Rogers even revisited the scene in Clemens' last episode in 1993. Asked by Clemens what he was thinking about all those years ago as they were soaking their feet, Rogers smiled and said, "I was just thinking of all the different ways people say I love you." Do you love being able to record your favorite shows so you can watch them when it's convenient? If so, you should give thanks to Fred Rogers. He played a pivotal role in making that happen. When VCRs and Betamax broke onto the scene in 1984, a big selling point was that they could record live programming. Unfortunately, network execs freaked out. They felt that taping shows using this technology constituted copyright infringement. The ensuing lawsuit escalated all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Experts and witnesses were called to testify, and among them was Fred Rogers. While huge production studios and television networks duked it out over a perceived loss of proceeds, this public TV man, who comparatively made very little, said he had absolutely no objection to viewers recording episodes of his show. As he put it, I just feel that anything that allows a person to be more active in the control of his or her life in a healthy way is important. Rogers' words definitely made an impact, and his testimony was considered instrumental in making the landmark decision. Ultimately, it was determined that taped recordings fall under fair use and that the manufacturers of those devices couldn't be held liable for copyright infringement. Well, this is a surprising one. When you think of Mr. Rogers, you probably imagine him wearing one of his favorite sweaters on a cozy couch somewhere reading a book. You probably don't picture him hunkering down to watch a spine-tingling zombie film. When the late director George A. Romero was just starting out, he was having a hard time finding someone willing to give him a chance, until he met Mr. Rogers, that is. Recognizing that the aspiring filmmaker needed some camera experience, Rogers offered him a job on the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood crew.
Most of the people that are working professionals in media today from Pittsburgh worked for Fred. All of us started with Fred.
Fun fact, Michael Keaton was also a crew member on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood early on in his career. Anyway, it's one thing to give someone a job, but did Fred Rogers ever watch any of Romero's scary movies? The answer is yes. He reportedly watched Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, and he apparently loved them both. When Romero asked what Rogers thought of his work, he reportedly said, "It's a lot of fun, George." Fred Rogers was born just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so it's not too surprising that residents would want to honor his memory. In 2016, a Change.org petition started circulating. The hope was to raise enough signatures to inspire the Allegheny County Airport Authority and the city of Pittsburgh to officially name their airport the Fred Rogers International Airport. The online document explained that Pittsburgh is still an active transit hub, and for many people, our airport will be their first experience in Pittsburgh. We wish to welcome everybody to our neighborhood. Unsurprisingly, 15,216 neighbors agreed. Bob Kurlick, Vice President of Media Relations for the Airport Authority, assured Pittsburgh Magazine that, "We appreciate the interest in the airport and creative ideas from travelers, and we know that Fred Rogers occupies a special place in the hearts of Pittsburghers and people around the world. Because of that, Mr. Rogers is already part of the experience here." Sounds like a missed opportunity to us. Fred Rogers thought it was important to equip kids with the tools they'd need to navigate life's most difficult moments. He covered a wide range of topics on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he wasn't afraid to touch upon some of life's darker twists and turns. In one episode, Prince Tuesday runs away from home. People correctly assume it's because he just can't deal with his parents' constant fighting at home.
Oh, Prince Tuesday. Have you been here for a long time?
I've been here long enough.
The story arc lasts for several episodes, with people continuing to search for Prince Tuesday.
I guess you know we're looking for the prince.
Yes, I know. That's why I thought I'd come and help.
And once he's found, a classmate even tells him that she feared the worst.
I thought that you were lost and maybe far, far away, and maybe even dead.
Kids at home were probably worried about the same thing. Instead of skirting around the issue of death, Fred Rogers faced it head on. Throughout the show, he taught kids how to cope with difficult emotions like fear, shame, and anger. He understood that kids needed to learn how to live in the real world, and he taught them how to be open and brave and own their feelings. Fred Rogers was honored with many awards in his lifetime and was deservedly inducted into the Television Hall of Fame in 1999. In 2002, just a year before his death, he was presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President George W. Bush.
Fred Rogers has entertained and educated children for more than 30 years through his extraordinary public television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
David Newell played Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and acted as an associate producer on the show. He once mentioned to Rogers that many children were terrified of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, portrayed by the late actress Margaret Hamilton. Newell proposed bringing her onto the show so that kids could see she was neither wicked nor a witch in real life. Rogers loved that idea. He immediately reached out to Hamilton, asking if she'd like to appear on the show to explain to children that the Wicked Witch was just a character she played in a movie. Hamilton accepted the offer without a moment's hesitation. In her 1975 appearance on the show, she even wore her old costume one last time.
It's very nice to see you.
Oh, that would be fun to be able to talk like that.
In 2003, generations of fans mourned Fred Rogers when he died from stomach cancer at the age of 74. And incredibly, the fine people at the International Astronomical Union found the perfect way to honor his memory. They named an asteroid after him. Discovered on March 21, 1993, the Mars-crossing asteroid, now known as 26858 Mr. Rogers, includes the following passage in its online description. Fred McFeely Rogers, 1928 to 2003, was a passionate advocate for children who taught that everyone is unique and deserving of love and respect just the way you are. For more than 30 years, he used his public television program Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a vehicle of service to the youngest members of the human family. After becoming an ordained minister in 1963, Fred Rogers gave up on living his life for the church and began pursuing a career in the arts. He was hired to make theme music for several shows on NBC, and he probably would have been quite comfortable living the rest of his life on that salary. But something about the job just didn't feel right to him. He reportedly felt that the network's reliance on ads and merchandise influenced the programming. He also felt like the things he was seeing on TV were contrary to his personal beliefs. He once said, "I saw people throwing pies at each other's faces, and that to me was such demeaning behavior. And if there's anything that bothers me, it's one person demeaning another. That really makes me mad." He decided to use that anger productively and left the job to focus on developing programs for children. He believed that television geared toward younger audiences should be free of advertising, and he believed programs should address real issues, teaching kids how to cope with everyday situations and emotions. He had to travel to Canada to get his first big break with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. It was there he created Mr. Rogers, an early version of the show. Eventually, he moved back to the States, where Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood debuted on February 19, 1968. Back in 1969, PBS was struggling to get off the ground. The concept of public television was new, and people were skeptical of its worth. Fred Rogers appeared before the United States Senate Subcommittee on Communications and was directly questioned by Rhode Island Senator John Pastore, a man who was known for his gruffness.
This is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child to help him realize that he is unique.
After just over 6 minutes, Pastore admitted that he had goosebumps listening to Rogers speak about his show, and then he readily agreed to give PBS the requested funding.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just earned the $20 million.
Pastore was so enamored with Rogers, he even requested a copy of the show because he wanted to watch it himself. In one particularly powerful moment, Rogers explains that drama doesn't have to involve people bopping one another over the head. It can simply show how scary it can be for a kid to get a haircut.
I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country.
True drama, he argued, could be as simple as watching two men work out their anger in a constructive way.
When the Flintstones landed in 1960, it was the first major primetime animated series, and therefore designed to appeal to adult viewers who were home in the evenings. In the decades since, though, the story of the Flintstone family has become a staple of children's programming, leading to a lot of stuff that just goes over kids' heads. These are the dark parts of the Flintstones you didn't notice when you were a kid. In the Flintstones' fictional Stone Age world, there isn't much in the way of modern appliances or conveniences, but the show does a great and humorous job of making the world as modern as possible with the limited technology available. The cars are famously powered by the driver's feet, making driving to the grocery store a strenuous and highly unsafe event. Houses are made of cut stone, paper is replaced with stone tablets. They even have cameras, iceboxes, and bowling alleys. The world is a technological dream to our ancestors with the sharpened rocks and rudimentary fire-making skills that define the Paleolithic period. But how exactly does Hanna-Barbera's prehistoric world manage to produce the equivalent of modern-day technology? Exploitation. Pick any episode and you'll see it. Animal exploitation is one of the major themes of the show from start to finish. For example, in the episode Ladies' Night at the Lodge, a dinosaur under the sink is used as a garbage disposal, while the trunk of a mammoth is run through the wall as a faucet. A trope within the show portrays these animals complaining about their unfair treatment. Not only are they exploited, but they're intelligent enough to know it. A dark reality is one where you strive to better your life but can't gain an inch. Unfortunately, it happens to real people all the time. They work in the same factory their entire life instead of climbing the corporate ladder. The American dream. The Flintstones world doesn't differ from ours in that respect. That's not to say that Fred Flintstone didn't try to rise in stature. He had dreams and aspirations. The modern Stone Age man didn't want to spend the rest of his life digging gravel for Mr. Slate. In the episode Flintstone or Princetone, Fred admits to having a bleak future devoid of advancement, so he goes to college. His high school education was minimal because he'd spent all of his time focusing on football, so college was his second chance. But of course, Fred ended up in the same boat once at Princetone University. just drafted back onto the football team. The episode dips into dark satire of the working world when Mr. Slate offers Fred what he thinks is a promotion. He'd been to college now, after all. Mr. Slate quickly shoots down that silly notion, though, explaining that it had taken Fred 12 years just to get the hang of his job. No, Mr. Slate just wants Fred to play on his company football team. Down once again with Fred's dreams, down straight to the gravel pits. Season 6 of The Flintstones was struggling for a revival, and decided a new character might be just the thing to spruce up things for viewers. To achieve this, the series brought in a little green alien by the name of the Great Gazoo, along with new laughs. Gazoo was a funny guy. He was tiny, he showed up out of nowhere, and had the power to do almost anything, it seemed. What's better? Only Fred and Barney could see him. It makes them look crazy, and everyone laughs. But Gazoo wasn't exactly a good guy. He explains to Barney and Fred, after crash landing in front of them in the episode The Great Gazoo, that he's been sent to Stone Age Earth as a form of punishment. His future world of Zetox cast him out for creating a doomsday device that would destroy the entire universe.
Cruel and unusual punishment, that's what it is.
So, what do Fred and Barney do? They don't report him to the authorities, no. They hang out with the little green sociopath. The two of them are either harboring a genocidal fugitive or having a shared schizophrenic episode. Either way, it's dark. Fred and Wilma Flintstone have the type of marriage that needs some serious counseling, and it's been that way the whole time. Episode 1 starts some years after their wedding, but the trouble had apparently been going on since their honeymoon. Wilma and Betty are looking through an old Flintstone photo album in the episode The Gambler, and they particularly focus on wedding and honeymoon images. Fred graces the photos with his grinning presence, while Wilma clearly looks unhappy in each. Not one smile from the new bride. Why? Well, Fred is selfish and manipulative. The marriage also has its fair share of distrust, as highlighted when the ladies sneak into the Water Buffalo Lodge to see what their husbands are up to in Ladies' Night at the Lodge. Wilma's distrust is valid, though, since Fred is constantly checking out other women. In the episode Flintstone or Princetone, Fred rattles off the dimensions of some old classmate he's mentally checking out. Fred's personality has a lot to do with their problems. As Wilma says to Fred in Little Bam Bam,
"You're jealous, thoughtless, loudmouthed, overbearing, quick-tempered, possessive, but not a heel."
At least Fred admits he doesn't deserve her right afterward. He doesn't. Poor Wilma. This theme isn't only dark, it's relatively sad. Plenty of would-be parents out there understand the pain that Barney and Betty went through for the first few seasons of the Flintstones. They tried to have a baby of their own, but their little cartoon bodies weren't cut out for it. Their childbearing fate was in the hands of the Flintstones gods, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. So while the gods were deciding their future in the writing room, the rebels would spend their time moping about their biological inabilities or playing with pebbles once she was introduced to the show in The Blessed Event. Hanna-Barbera, though, were merciful gods, and the rebels wouldn't have to suffer forever. Only for the first 3 seasons. In Season 4, specifically the episode titled Little Bam Bam, Betty and Barney's prayers would be answered after the couple implored their creators to grant them the slightest mercy in a last-ditch effort. They wished upon a falling star. Apparently, that's what it takes to sway Hanna-Barbera. Later in that episode, Little Bam Bam was left on the doorstep, and the rebels started their arduous journey through parenthood. Suicide is one of the darkest concepts to periodically poke its head into children's cartoons over the years. The Flintstones had its own take on it, and it's pretty messed up. After Bam Bam shows up on Betty and Barney's doorstep, the world is a brighter place, for a moment. But there's a whole bunch of bureaucracy in adopting a child, both in the real world and the Flintstones world. While waiting to hear back about Bam Bam's adoptions, someone else is awarded custody. Barney has taken all he can. Luckily, Bam Bam's new parents find out they're going to have a baby of their own, so they don't need to adopt Bam Bam. Cool, kind of. Bam Bam is now a rebel, but Barney is nowhere in sight. That's because he's on a bridge, holding a boulder, saying his last goodbyes before he jumps to his death. Fred saves him at the last second, and the children watching are only mildly scarred for the rest of their lives. Fred Flintstone has a lot of not-so-great qualities. He's angry, aggressive, manipulative, and he has a gambling problem. He doesn't lose a few quarters in the slot machine or drop $20 on a hand of poker either. He has an honest-to-goodness gambling addiction. Unfortunately, they didn't have addiction programs back in the Hanna-Barbera Stone Age, but they did have psychiatrists. And Fred received treatment from one for this exact problem. There's an episode of Season 2 devoted to Fred's gambling problem called The Gambler, when the paperboy comes over for a game of marbles and decides it would be fun to put a little money on the line. When Fred hears the word bet, his eyes get wide, and his head might as well pop off as he says the word bet over and over like it's some sort of mental tic. Wilma ends up telling Betty about the time Fred gambled away everything they had and how they couldn't afford food when he was on a gambling kick. Wilma had to force Fred to seek psychological help, but she had to make a bet with him to do it. Long story short, Fred's gambling issues return, and Wilma forgives him for losing a bunch of their money. Again. In case you haven't noticed yet, a majority of the storylines in the Flintstones seem to stem from Fred's personality flaws. He manipulates everything around him like a champion chess player. He deceives the people in his life like he's a secret agent. He'll do or say whatever he has to in order to make life go his way. The series begins with Fred's signature manipulation. Season 1, Episode 1. Fred and Barney have previously agreed to a date night with their gals, but Fred would rather go bowling. He convinces Barney to go along with one of his mastermind schemes. Fred has a head injury, and Barney stays back to take care of his friend while the ladies go to the opera by themselves. It gets worse. The two men use a flying machine that Barney had built to get to and from the bowling alley. The whole time, Fred is telling Barney that it's their invention and it's going to make the two of them rich, acting like the idea was his the whole time. So he didn't just use Barney to get out of the date, he leeches off him. Fred is a violent and manipulative guy that no one in their right mind would hang out with, so Barney must be nuts. All the same, the little guy sticks next to Fred through virtually anything. Fred's negative personality traits constantly come through in this friendship, one composed primarily of Fred taking advantage of Barney's good nature. If something doesn't go as planned, he'll immediately begin threatening his best friend with violence or belittling him in a way that had to have caused some major issues for Barney. Fred does do some nice things for Barney, though. He supports him when he's going through the adoption process in the episode Little Bam Bam and even saves his life. But it's hard not to see the wildly shifting treatment as a classical abusive relationship. In the first episode of this series, Fred threatens Barney for being noisy while he's trying to take a nap. He tries to slug Barney for getting a stuck bowling ball off his finger in the rock quarry story. And so on, and so on. He's not the sort of friend anyone would want to have. In recent times, our society has made leaps and bounds toward recognizing and eliminating body shaming. It still happens, but more people are recognizing the damage it does every day. It wasn't that way in the 60s when the Flintstones was in production, and Fred bore the brunt of the body-shaming attacks. Calling someone fat may be low-hanging fruit for childish laughter, but we understand now just how much trauma it can cause. Fred's a husky guy. He can't help it. It's the way Hanna-Barbera designed him. And as far as insults go, Fred probably dishes out more than anyone else in the cartoon. But he's the primary target for body shaming. From sly comments about his weight to outright calling him fat in some episodes, it's everywhere in the series. Some of the jokes were better set up than others, like this one from the episode The Hot Piano, for instance.
It won't go through. It's stuck. Stuck, huh? Well, stand back while I throw a little weight at it. But Fred, you're a lot of weight.
Check out the episode Fred Flintstone Before and After to see how bad it gets, as the entire episode is all about how fat and ugly Fred is.
But you know what they say. Television adds 10 pounds to your appearance.
Well, eating like a horse has added 50 pounds to yours.
Even if you were one of the grumpy few who didn't love Barney, well, Barney loved you anyway. And he told you so in every episode. Luckily, there's one person who seems to be just as joyful and optimistic as Barney himself, David Joyner, the man who wore that big purple suit. Aside from acting, there's a lot more to Joyner than just Barney, like the fact that he scored an ITT Tech degree in electronic engineering, he worked as a software analyst, he's a Reiki practitioner, and he's a licensed massage therapist for starters. Let's dive in and see what the accomplished man behind the dyno is really like. Psychic premonition. Joyner is one spiritual dude. He told Business Insider he knew ahead of time that he was going to get the role of Barney, stating, "I was supposed to do this character." Joyner says that when it's time to make big life decisions, he's always trusted his dreams to guide the way.
Well, the night before the audition, I had this dream, and in this dream, Barney passes out, and I have to give Barney mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Inspired by this, Joyner took his passion into his audition, successfully scoring the role of a lifetime and helping create one of the biggest cultural icons of the 90s.
So of course they called me, and asked if I would be Barney. And I said, of course. I pretty much already knew that I was going to be Barney.
Dinosaur decade. It'd be easy for adults to think that the guy playing Barney must have been a down-on-his-luck actor struggling to pay the bills with some weird side gig. According to People magazine, the 70-pound purple costume sometimes got up to 120 degrees on the inside, and the actor could only look out through Barney's mouth. On top of that, since Barney was actually voiced by a different man, being the guy who just has to wear the costume might seem like a rather thankless job. But David Joyner has been quite outspoken about how much he loved playing Barney.
Barney was beautiful. Barney was very, very good to me. I loved being Barney. I loved everything about being Barney.
Joyner was so passionate about the role that he played Barney for over a decade. Small screen regular. Believe it or not, Joyner has appeared in countless major TV shows of the last few decades. He's appeared in shows like House, Switched at Birth, Heart of Dixie, and Southland. Probably his most memorable guest appearance was in ER, where he had a recurring role as a dialysis technician. Shut down the rumors. While it was only recently that the public became aware of Joyner's true identity, there have always been bizarre conspiracy theories about the previously unknown guy who played Barney. The silliest of these rumors, which still pops up from time to time, is that the actor who played Barney was a crazy cocaine addict, supposedly so addicted that he hid his prized cocaine stash up Barney's purple tail, which eventually got him caught and thrown in jail. There's also a weird myth that claims the guy who played Barney supposedly hanged himself in costume. That one might have been tricky to pull off. Clearly, Joyner's alive and didn't go to prison, and both rumors were thoroughly debunked by Snopes. Rapping Bear. Though Joyner's dinosaur years are long behind him, he never stopped being the man in the costume. In the 21st century, he swapped out those purple scales for yellow fur, a sideways cap, and gold bling, thus becoming Hip Hop Harry, a bear who does educational rap videos.
I say hip hop, you say Harry, hip hop, hip hop.
These days, he seems to love Hip Hop Harry just as much as he loved Barney.
It's so much fun, just try and see. There's so many things that you can learn in the library.
Cha-ching. As it turns out, playing Barney was actually a really smart financial decision on Joyner's part. According to Business Insider, the earnings from the residual checks were big enough to make Joyner's jaw drop to the floor, and he managed to put that money to good use.
So I had this beautiful white stucco home, and I paid for the house with residuals, which was really cool.
Secret identity. In Joyner's interview with Grunge, the actor shared that one of the coolest things about having been Barney is that he gets to have a secret identity. Not surprisingly, he loves revealing his secret to unsuspecting bystanders, if only to see the looks on their faces. Joyner revealed, "A couple of days ago I was at Bed Bath & Beyond buying some things for the office, and this guy was working the register. This young guy. He was tall. You can tell he played football, kinda burly looking." Joyner said that the cashier inquired whether he was old enough to buy his items. Joyner responded, "Yes, sir, I am. And as a matter of fact, I was probably your childhood hero."
But there's only one Barney.
That's me.
Whether it was teaching kids how a bill becomes a law or showing them how to properly use a conjunction, Schoolhouse Rock was always a welcome presence in any classroom. But how did a series of educational songs turn into a nationwide phenomenon? In the early 1970s, David McCall, president of the McCaffrey and McCall Advertising Agency, took his family on a vacation to a Wyoming dude ranch. During the trip, he observed that his son Davey seemed to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the lyrics of his favorite rock bands, like the Rolling Stones. To the elder McCall, this skill conflicted with his son's inability to memorize his multiplication tables at school. That experience planted an idea in McCall's head. Kids might remember fundamental educational concepts if they're presented as rock and pop song lyrics. Initially, McCall focused on making an album of educational songs, specifically songs about math. In need of original music, McCall asked one of the advertising agency's jingle writers to write a song that was essentially multiplication tables set to music. He didn't like what he ended up getting back, as he felt it sounded too much like a cloying commercial jingle. Something had to change. Unhappy with what the staff jingle writer created for his idea, David McCall sought out an outside songwriter. His colleague, art director and musician George Newell, knew a jazz bassist named Ben Tucker, who in turn recommended his collaborator Bob Dorough. As Dorough told NPR's Fresh Air, he said, "My partner, Bob Dorough, can do anything. He can put music to anything. McCall told Duro that he wanted a song about multiplication tables, as that was what his son was struggling with at the time. Apparently, Duro got the job because he was the only composer whose audition song took the rock part of Schoolhouse Rock seriously. As he put it, I learned later that he had invited other Broadway songwriters to do this task, and they came up with a more simple, doggerel type of songwriting, writing down, as it were, to children. It took Duro 3 weeks to write 3 is a Magic Number. To get the lyrics and themes right, he researched math, magic, and even the occult, and it paid off.
I never really thought it'd be this big, you know.
From the beginning, the team behind Schoolhouse Rock took the educational element of the project very seriously. They wanted to make sure that they not only delivered accurate information, but that they delivered it in a manner deemed suitable and effective. Show developer David McCall served on the board of directors of Bank Street College of Education. To see if Schoolhouse Rock was viable, he asked the school to play the demo recording of 3 is a Magic Number to kids in schools in New York City and the surrounding suburbs. Bank Street College representatives successfully used the song to introduce the idea of multiplication tables to students, as well as reinforce existing concepts. With the certification of a legitimate educational organization secured, Schoolhouse Rock production continued. A Bank Street College representative would continue to consult on the series for years, with an educational expert there taking about a week to sign off on the lyrics of each short before recording could occur. Schoolhouse Rock is an evocative title, and the cartoons that carried its name in the 1970s and 1980s became part of a recognized brand in educational television. Despite its clever reference to a 1957 Elvis song, Schoolhouse Rock wasn't what the show was originally called during development. Before its debut on the ABC Saturday morning schedule, producers operated the project under a title that strongly connoted both an instructional element and a musical bent: Scholastic Rock. However, a long-established company with a similar name wasn't too happy to hear about this. Scholastic, a publisher of educational and entertainment books for children, operator of school book fairs, and printer of an educational magazine, have been operational in some form since the 1920s, and their lawyers ordered that the show find a new name. Looking to avoid a lawsuit, the TV contingent decided on the name Schoolhouse Rock instead. The music publishing side of the endeavor, however, was allowed to retain the name Scholastic Rock. Bolstered by Bob Duro's 3 is a Magic Number, the McCaffrey and McCall team set out to get their educational song project out to the world. But they weren't originally going to do it via television. Instead, David McCall envisioned the project as an album packaged with a book. However, McCall and McCaffrey ran into issues when they couldn't get any traction with publishers for the initial book and record deal, which they pitched under the name Multiplication Rock. The approach changed completely when someone at the advertising agency noticed that one of its clients was ABC. After that, the art department drew up a series of animation storyboards synchronized with Duro's recording of 3 is a Magic Number. They then presented it to Michael Eisner, future president of the Walt Disney Company, who was vice president for children's programming at ABC at the time. Eisner brought along accomplished animation director Chuck Jones to the meeting, the creative force behind Warner Brothers' Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons, and director of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Jones was presently in charge of a Saturday morning anthology called Curiosity Shop. Jones enjoyed the presentation and recommended that Eisner buy Multiplication Rock for use in his series. The first ever Schoolhouse Rock segment aired on Curiosity Shop nearly 2 years before it became a standalone segment on ABC's Saturday morning lineup. 2 of the best-known songs to ever air as part of Schoolhouse Rock demonstrate the breadth and ambition of the entire series. Conjunction Junction is a funky folk number that uses train imagery to explain how and, but, and or connect words and phrases and clauses, while I'm Just a Bill is a soul-tinged song that explains how a bill becomes a law in the USA. They're very different songs, but they were recorded with the same personnel. Handling lead vocals on Conjunction Junction was Jack Sheldon, an accomplished jazz singer. He was also a trumpet player, and he contributed his skills alongside other prolific Los Angeles session musicians Leroy Vinegar, Stuart Scharf, Teddy Edwards, Nick Ciroli, and Dave Frischberg. The same band also worked on I'm Just a Bill. Even though it was released 2 years after Conjunction Junction, they recorded on the same day during the same session, with Jack Sheldon singing lead on that one as well. Conjunction Junction may be the most famous of the Grammar Rock collection of shorts, but Interjections isn't far behind. This catchy tune was made to educate viewers on the proper usage of outbursts. From well to oh to hey, it has plenty of interjection examples to share. And naturally, it ends with one too.
Darn, that's the end.
That line was said by Lauren Yohe, a common presence in Schoolhouse Rock cartoons. Her father, Tom Yohe, was the lead designer of Schoolhouse Rock, and Lauren was 6 years old at the time of recording. That wasn't the only time that a Schoolhouse Rock employee utilized their child for authentic young voices. The 1977 America Rock segment, Fireworks, features producer Radford Stone's 10-year-old daughter Charlotte and 12-year-old son Ian. In I'm Just a Bill, musician Jack Sheldon portrays the walking, talking Bill, who explains the lawmaking process to a boy, portrayed by his son John. Considering that it was made to teach relatively simple concepts, Schoolhouse Rock was geared toward an audience of elementary school-age viewers. Because of this, the makers of Schoolhouse Rock tried their best to stick to squeaky clean, all ages appropriate material. That was why producers had difficulty getting one particular episode onto the air. The 1973 segment, Naughty Number 9, taught kids all the unique quirks of the number 9. It prominently featured a cat, also named Naughty Number 9, hanging out in a pool hall, puffing on a cigar, and forming math problems with the smoke. Because of its depiction of pervasive smoking, ABC's broadcast standards and practices nearly wouldn't allow Naughty Number 9 to air in its original form. However, Schoolhouse Rock producers persuaded the censors against ordering edits, arguing that the smoking helped characterize Naughty Number 9 as a villain. Another Schoolhouse Rock cartoon was temporarily and preemptively banned. Completed in the mid-1970s, Three Ring Government explains the three branches of the U.S. government as a kid dreams that each is part of a trilogy of circus acts. ABC didn't air the piece until 1979. Co-creator George Newell explained why to Noble Mania, saying, "It was because of their fear that the FCC and Congress would resent being compared to a circus and threaten their broadcast license renewal." David McCall led the creation of Schoolhouse Rock based on the idea that catchy pop rock could be used to teach educational concepts to kids. As a testament to the effectiveness of the method and Schoolhouse Rock's songwriters' unique execution of the concept, several of the episodes have been used to educate adults. I'm Just a Bill provides a step-by-step lesson in how a proposed bill becomes a congressionally approved codified law. Starting in the mid-1970s and for many years after, the offices of congresspeople would call Schoolhouse Rock production facilities to request tapes of I'm Just a Bill to share with their staffers so they'd understand their jobs better.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far.
Schoolhouse Rock also helped educate many doctors and other medical professionals. Multiple medical schools worked with Schoolhouse Rock producers to use the 1979 anatomy-based clip Telegraph Line to explain how the nervous system functions to first-year medical school students. Not every song prepared for inclusion in the Schoolhouse Rock series made it to air. Some didn't even get much past the songwriting stage and into animation, and when that happened, there was usually good reason. The Grammar Rock segment, Verb, That's What's Happening, was a replacement for another song about verbs, the part of speech that describes what action is taking place. Veteran Schoolhouse Rock composer and lyricist Bob Dorough came up with a song that had a lot of action in it, as that would translate well into the cartoon medium. Producers had originally intended to animate a cartoon that writer Dave Frischberg called A World Without Verbs, but they ran into a pretty big issue. What would a world without verbs look like, anyway? Nothing would actually happen, and that made for some rather boring animation. In the end, A World Without Verbs never received a full production. In the early 1990s, nostalgia-fueled renewed interest in Schoolhouse Rock led to a new appreciation for the educational cartoon collection and other forms of mainstream media. Schoolhouse Rock Live debuted at the Cabaret Voltaire in Chicago in August 1993 and enjoyed an 8-month run to sold-out crowds. The creators built a self-aware narrative around the assorted Schoolhouse Rock shorts, with a plot concerning a nervous rookie teacher. In the show, the teacher gains the confidence he needs when the characters from the educational TV show emerge from his mind and his TV to perform the iconic songs that made them famous. A shorter version designed for school theater departments is frequently performed around the U.S. In 1996, Atlantic Records subsidiary Lava Records collected some of the era's major alternative rock bands and rappers to contribute to the tribute album Schoolhouse Rock Rocks. Pavement recorded No More Kings, Blind Melon took on 3 Is a Magic Number, and Skee-Lo did The Tale of Mr. Morton. After a 12-year run with multiple weekly airings on ABC's Saturday morning lineup, Schoolhouse Rock ended its original broadcast run in 1985. Unlike most TV series that run for longer than a decade, it seemingly didn't leave enough of a cultural footprint to merit preservation. Many of the elements of these Schoolhouse Rock cartoons disappeared or were destroyed. Producers allowed the animation cells to be discarded, while they lost track of the arrangements for the music. The master audio tapes, recorded in 24-track format, went missing before being discovered later in a Connecticut barn. Nostalgia is what ended up saving Schoolhouse Rock from complete obscurity. In early 1990, organizers of a symposium on education at Dartmouth College invited the producers and writers of the show to attend. Around 900 students showed up, and they were all acutely familiar with Schoolhouse Rock songs. That followed a petitioning drive at college campuses, beginning at the University of Connecticut, urging ABC to revive Schoolhouse Rock in some way. In 1994, the series indeed made a comeback on ABC with a new slate of episodes teaching financial literacy called Money Rock.
I balanced my budget.
You never had to fear when Underdog was here, so who's to blame for his and his cartoon colleagues' demise? Was it kids losing interest or FCC regulation? The first cartoon to air on a Saturday morning was Crusader Rabbit, 4-minute-long shorts that spoofed movie serials. They were co-created by Jay Ward, who would become more famous for his later creation, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. Crusader Rabbit, which debuted in 1950, was the first real attempt to create animation for television. Prior to that, animated shorts were the exclusive fodder of movie theaters. But while Crusader Rabbit was the first, the series didn't kick off the phenomenon. The true catalyst came when William Hanna and Joseph Barbera were fired from MGM's animation department in 1957. They subsequently founded their own animation studio, where they innovated several limited animation techniques that saved the studio time and money. This allowed them to produce numerous weekly half-hour cartoon shows like The Flintstones, The Jetsons, and others. These techniques included reducing the amount of motion occurring on screen and recycling backgrounds. As these shows became more abundant, they were increasingly seen as TV for children, so they got moved into the time slot when children were most likely to be watching TV, Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. until noon. By 1966, all three of the major networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, were dedicating a block of time on Saturday mornings to animated children's programming. The idea of animated shows like The Flintstones as primetime viewing for the whole family faded, and cartoons became thought of as Saturday stuff for kids.
I like kids' shows. They're very innocent, wholesome quality.
The reasons for the end of the traditional Saturday morning cartoon block are numerous. They have their roots in parental advocacy groups, who were protesting the amount of time kids spent watching TV by the late 60s. These groups were concerned about cartoon depictions of violence and stereotypes, as well as the commercialism that has always been a part of TV cartoons. Kids, it turns out, had a difficult time distinguishing the shows they were watching from the ads that ran during them. Despite attempts to balance advertising with education and social content like Schoolhouse Rock, the new wave of cartoons that hit the air following the success of the Smurfs were extremely commercial and all tied to popular toy lines. These included shows like G.I. Joe, He-Man, and Care Bears. In 1990, the FCC passed the Children's Television Act, which prescribed a minimum number of hours of educational content for children per week for broadcast networks. They strengthened these mandates in 1996 with the Children's Programming Report, which added even more guidelines for what could be aired in those once precious Saturday morning hours. Additional factors such as cable television, the increased popularity of the internet, VCRs, and after-school animated programming blocks all contributed to the downfall of Saturday morning cartoons. But the earliest blow was the government telling networks they needed fewer shows with talking animals and more with people talking about animals. September 12, 1992 is considered the day Saturday morning cartoons died. This was when NBC first stopped airing animated shows during the traditional cartoon programming block. As it turns out, NBC had already considered dumping its cartoon block in the early 1980s. They felt that kids' rapidly fluctuating attention and interests made it difficult to land a solid, predictable hit. But then the Smurfs came out in 1981. It became a monster success for the network, giving the cartoon block a reprieve for another decade. But once the Smurfs ended and a new cohort of kids were watching Nickelodeon, Nickelodeon instead of NBC, the network finally pulled the trigger and replaced their children's programming block with live-action programming for adults. The one remaining concession was a block of shows aimed at younger teens, inspired by the hit teen sitcom Saved by the Bell. This plan did not make most anti-cartoon advocacy groups happy either. Peggy Charon, the president of Action for Children's Television, told the Los Angeles Times, "NBC is not taking away cartoons, which are mostly dumb anyway, and replacing them with meaningful, terrific programs for kids, but instead putting in their place yet another soft information show for adults."
That would be illogical.
Beginning in 1992, the Teen NBC, or TNBC, lineup lasted for a decade, adding and subtracting new short-lived teen dramas like Just Deal and Skate in the early years of the 21st century. By 2002, however, ratings had dropped significantly, and NBC learned that their programming for younger viewers was not reaching its intended audience. It turns out that the median age of viewers for TNBC was almost 42 years old. To try to fix this, and because there were still federal standards for minimum hours allotted for children's educational programming, NBC outsourced their Saturday morning lineup to Discovery Kids. The new Discovery Kids on NBC programming block was a 3-hour chunk of shows with titles like Prehistoric Planet, Croc Files, and Scout Safari. This lineup would only last a few years itself, ending in 2006, but the format of infotainment TV that technically meets the FCC standards has remained the formula for NBC Saturday mornings ever since. The branding has undergone many changes, from Cubo on NBC to NBC Kids to The More You Know, which began in 2016 and is still ongoing as of late 2023. This all may sound less exciting than a band of globe-trotting singing chipmunks, but at least these shows won't make kids want to buy merch. While NBC was the first to abandon animated children's programming on Saturday mornings, eventually all the other networks would follow suit. The next network to drop cartoons was CBS, who, largely prompted by the increased FCC strictures of 1996, revamped their Saturday morning lineup as Think CBS Kids in 1997. Prior to that, CBS had been home to hit animated series like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Garfield and Friends, and The Muppet Babies. Now, however, kids getting up to watch TV with a bowl of their favorite cereal would be treated to the Sports Illustrated for Kids show, the new Ghost Rider Mysteries, and a kids' version of Wheel of Fortune called Wheel 2000. The Think CBS Kids lineup would prove to be a ratings disaster, however, and the branding would be abandoned by 1998. Retitled as CBS Kids Show, the network's Saturday morning block would actually return to animated programming for several years through partnerships with the Canadian animation studio Nelvana, Nickelodeon's Nick Jr., and Deke Entertainment's Secret Saturday Morning Slumber Party. Animation was dropped again in 2013 in favor of a block of educational programming originally called CBS Dream Team, which was renamed CBS Weekend in 2023. This lineup features such shows as Lucky Dog, Recipe Rehab, Hope in the Wild, and Tales of Valor. Of the 3 original major networks, ABC held onto its Saturday morning cartoon block the longest, thanks in no small part to its affiliation with Disney. In 1997, ABC launched a revamped children's programming lineup called One Saturday Morning, which aired several different Disney-produced animated shows, including Recess and Pepper Ann. In 2001, the block was expanded and renamed ABC Kids. This new lineup included cartoons like Lilo and Stitch, the series, but also included live-action material such as NBA Inside Stuff and Power Rangers. On top of all that, it aired reruns of live-action Disney shows like Even Stevens and Lizzie McGuire. By the end of ABC Kids' reign as the Saturday morning programming block on ABC, the time slot was mostly filled with reruns of live-action Disney sitcoms like Hannah Montana and The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. This was all scrapped in 2011 in favor of a new weekend educational package put together by Hearst Media, the same company that makes CBS Weekend and NBC's The More You Know. Like the other Hearst syndication packages, this new lineup, called Weekend Adventure, is designed to meet FCC educational standards. As a result, it features a lot of animal shows. You can settle in on a Saturday morning and watch, for example, Wildlife Nation with Jeff Corwin. Fox Kids, the Saturday morning programming block for the Fox network, launched in 1990 as Fox Children's Network. This was a result of a dispute between Disney and Fox over the rights to air the Disney afternoon programming block. Fox Kids not only ran its own original programming, like Bobby's World, but it also had shows produced by other studios, including Batman, the animated series, X-Men, the animated series, and The Tick. While the Fox Kids schedule originally took up 3 hours on Saturdays and a half hour each weekday, as the programming block became increasingly popular, it ballooned to 4 hours on Saturdays and 3 hours on weekdays. By the mid-90s, Fox Kids programming was the most popular on the network.
Nice work, Tick!
Well, thank you, Arthur. The key is going against the grain.
Despite being the highest-rated block of children's television for much of the 90s, Fox Kids lost ground to ABC's Disney-based programming in 1997. And things only got worse when Pokémon moved to Kids WB in 1999. By 2001, Fox Kids was no longer the powerhouse it once was. The time slot was bought by 4Kids Entertainment, which aired its own animated programming on Saturday mornings. Fox got out of the children's programming business altogether in 2008 and filled the time slot with infomercials and the syndicated educational programming block Exploration Station. Though it launched as a 2-hour block in 2014, in 2016 it increased to 3 hours, with shows like Exploration Awesome Planet, Exploration DIY Sci, and an animal show called Second Chance Pets. The last network standing was the CW, which had begun airing children's programming on Saturday mornings in 1995 as Kids WB, before merging to form CW the following decade. Kids WB aired several extremely popular series, including some brought over from Fox Kids, like Animaniacs, Batman the animated series, and Pokémon. The block got even more popular when it introduced various anime series in 1999. It survived a merger with CW in 2006, even though it dropped its weekday morning and afternoon time slots. In 2008, Kids WB was replaced by the CW4 Kids, which, as the name probably gives away, was made up of shows produced by 4Kids. These included The Batman, the 2003 version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Yu-Gi-Oh! The block was renamed Toonzai in 2010 and then fully replaced by the Saban-run programming block Vortex.
Go away! We're having a good time until you shut up!
Vortex was the last gasp of the Saturday morning cartoon. From 2012 to 2014, it aired such titles as Justice League Unlimited, Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, and Transformers Prime. But on September 27, 2014, the process begun by NBC all those years ago was completed. Vortex was replaced by One Magnificent Morning, a block of live-action educational content produced by, you guessed it, Hearst Media. One Magnificent Morning offers you yet more animal-based content, such as Jack Hanna's Into the Wild, Pet Vet Dream Team, and Tales of Valor, which also airs on CBS on Saturday. Despite the fact that the closure of Vortex in 2014 marked the end of traditional animated programming blocks on Saturday mornings, it's pretty doubtful that a lot of modern kids even noticed. There is no shortage of cable channels like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon that air cartoons all over the place. And of course, streaming services like Netflix and Hulu mean that kids can pretty much watch any cartoon they want, whenever they want, and as often as they want, as long as the network's parent company doesn't drop it. As for the children of the 70s, 80s, and 90s who grew up with Saturday morning cartoons, it's not like they're missing much either. They too can watch the exact cartoons they watched as kids, either in the original format, offered archivally on streaming services, or through the numerous remakes of hit nostalgia properties like He-Man, Transformers, and Thundercats. While it might be sad to think about a lost tradition, it turns out cartoons are doing just fine.
Offices overflowing with books, a James Earl Jones do-over, and getting left behind by No Child Left Behind. It turns out this beloved show did even more than just teach a generation just how fun reading could be. There are many unlikely heroes behind the conception of Reading Rainbow, most prominently Twyla Liggett, a state reading coordinator from Nebraska. After completing her doctorate at the University of Nebraska, her talent for writing grants led her to apply for a job at her local television station, Nebraska Education Television, or NETV. There was just one problem, as she confessed to Variety. I had no TV experience. I read books on how to interview and structure my resume for a job in television and got hired in project administration and development. When NETV expressed an interest in producing original programming, Liggett planted the seed that would become Reading Rainbow. Though there were already shows on the air that engaged children in reading, Liggett didn't think any of them had reached their full potential, telling Mental Floss, "I wanted to do something to mirror what I did in the classroom, which was read to kids out loud, get kids involved in the experience of reading, and have kids talk to each other about reading." In the end, Reading Rainbow was so effective that it could have only been designed by someone in the world of education. Tony Buttino was the Director of Educational Services at Buffalo Toronto Public Media, or WNED, a PBS-affiliated television station in Buffalo, New York. He was doing research on a phenomenon commonly known as the summer slide, during which children's reading comprehension decreases due to a lack of summer education. In speaking to local educators, Buttino saw the need for a summer television series that inspired a love of reading. Buttino began airing pre-existing shows that incorporated reading, but none of them were at the level of quality he desired. WNED began exploring the possibilities of original programming, which led them to partner with Nebraska's NETV. Buttino and NETV's Twyla Liggett had similar goals for what they wanted out of their new series, and by 1989, the series became so popular that it would air outside of the summer months and even be used within classrooms during the school year. In Mental Floss's History of Reading Rainbow, show writer Lynn Gannick revealed that part of the show's purpose was to target urban communities and families. Though the series would be made broad enough to appeal to audiences of all backgrounds, this original approach colored the types of books and topics featured on the series. Because inner cities house more diverse populations, Twyla Liggett sought to reflect that in the series. As Liggett writes in her Reading Rainbow Guide to Children's Books, "We have a special interest in good stories featuring protagonists who represent a cross-section of cultures: African American, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American." The entire series, by extension, kept diversity at the forefront. The documentary segments often immersed viewers in specific ethnic cultures. The first season alone included episodes on Chinese mythology and the histories of indigenous tribes. Children featured on the show's review segment were often children of color. Most importantly, LeVar Burton was chosen to be the show's host because the creators sought to have a person of color as the face of the series. It's a catchy title, but Reading Rainbow has nothing to do with rainbows, so what's the story? According to Tony Buttino, the name was suggested by an intern at WNED, whose name remains unknown to this day. That said, it isn't quite that simple. Part of the title originated from the creator's interest in including alliteration, as they believed that would attract children to the series, as well as the word reading. It's possible the creators took a tip from Ride the Reading Rocket, a progenitor of Reading Rainbow that previously aired on WNED. However, it's also possible that the term rainbow came from the show's inclusive mindset. Though also used by the LGBT movement since the 1970s, the rainbow has always been a symbol of diversity and social change. By calling the show Reading Rainbow, it showed that children of all colors and creeds could come together and unite through the power of reading. Believe it or not, beloved television icon LeVar Burton was not the creator's first choice to be the host of Reading Rainbow. Before Burton, there was Jackie Torrance, a renowned storyteller who traveled the world year-round performing stories for children and their families. Once described by the LA Times as the matriarch of storytelling in America, Torrance had already amassed experience on television and would have made for a captivating host. However, because boys were statistically more likely to fall victim to the summer slide, the show's creators pivoted toward a male host. After watching an interview with Burton on television, the show's creators met the television icon at a children's television conference and pitched him the idea for Reading Rainbow. Burton, who had found success starring in the ABC miniseries Roots, experienced firsthand the power of television as a medium for change, and was raised with a love of reading instilled in him by his mother.
I thought, what a great idea. Let's use the medium of television to steer kids back in the direction of literature and the written word.
Everyone knows the iconic theme song to Reading Rainbow, composed by electronic musician Steve Horlick. A graduate of Carnegie Mellon University's avant-garde music program, Horlick had just moved to New York City and found modest success working in commercials when he was offered a chance to submit a demo for the still gestating children's series. He collaborated with lyricists Dennis Kleinman and Janet Weir, who Horlick remembered had one specific goal for the song.
We have to create a sound that as soon as they hear it, they'll just come sliding in front of the TV set, so they'll know it's Reading Rainbow.
To accomplish this, Horlick created the song's opening twinkly riff using a unique synthesizer designed by West Coast instrument designer Don Buchla. Horlick used other Buchla synthesizers and a drum machine to fill in the rest, telling music dialogue. There were a lot of kids shows on the air in those days that were all jazz-based and rhythm section-based. We came along and did something a little different. Kellogg's, the company behind cereals like Fruit Loops and Frosted Flakes, were also an early investor in Reading Rainbow, to the point that, without them, the show would never have been made. After writing a proposal to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, Twyla Liggett was only able to raise half of the series' desired budget for the first season, leaving $1.6 million left to be sponsored. Liggett struggled for months until a contact from Nebraska put her in touch with the CEO of the Kellogg's Foundation. Liggett presented the series to their board and they agreed to fund the remainder of the show's budget without even seeing a pilot. At long last, this capped the development process for the first season of Reading Rainbow, which took 18 months altogether. In its infancy, the producers of Reading Rainbow struggled to obtain rights from publishing companies so they could feature books on the series. However, as the show rose in popularity, so too did their featured books. Often labeled with the show's logo for visibility, sales of some titles skyrocketed as high as 900%. Mimi Caden, a marketing director at E.P. Dutton, told the New York Times, "Reading Rainbow is the best thing that ever happened to children's books. Books that would sell 5,000 copies on their own sell 25,000 copies if they're on Reading Rainbow." In response, publishers didn't about face. Demand was so high that Reading Rainbow would require publishers to put their books back into print if it was selected for the series, often in paperback. As writer Lynn Gannick told Mental Floss, "After the first season, we could barely fit all the books we were getting sent into the office." The documentary segments on Reading Rainbow took viewers around the globe, often to exotic locations in the natural world. Because of this, the show's production crew were often put through the ringer. One such episode was Hill of Fire, which brought audiences to Mount Kilauea, Hawaii's most active volcano. The crew filmed during a live eruption, which made for sensational footage. However, it also came with safety concerns. Much of the crew were being transported to the surface of Kilauea via helicopter. However, toward the end of the shoot, impending changes in wind speed became a flight risk. The pilot attempted to evacuate the entire crew before things got too out of control, but two of the crew members were unable to be transported back. The two wound up staying the night on Kilauea with a group of scientists studying the volcano and returned safely the next day. Many beloved celebrities took part in Reading Rainbow as guest narrators for the week's featured book, but one of the most memorable narrators was James Earl Jones, who agreed to narrate the book Bringing the Rain to Kapiti Plain for the show's first season. In the Reading Rainbow Guide to Children's Books, co-creator Twyla Liggett recounts originally recording with Jones and the incredible events that followed, writing, "He originally took a lighthearted approach to his narration. However, once he thought about it and realized what an important message both the show and the book had, he called the producer and asked to do the reading again." Not only does Jones's darker, more patient vocal work give author Verna Artema's words much more gravitas, but he had the consideration and thoughtfulness to give the Reading Rainbow audience a reading worthy of the material.
The big black cloud, all heavy with rain, that shadowed the ground on Kapiti Plain.
Every episode of Reading Rainbow was bookended by a trio of additional book reviews performed by children. But rather than cast child actors, the show featured elementary school students found via local auditions held by the show's producers. After selecting a group of students who they felt would do well on camera, the producers paired each one with a book and helped them write their own book review.
Writing that book review and then performing it, it gave me a sense of ownership.
So read Jumanji.
In the documentary Butterfly in the Sky, author Jason Reynolds, who watched the show as a child, further adds to the importance of the segment, saying, "It was saying you matter, your stories matter, your voice matters, your opinion matters." In 1986, LeVar Burton's role as host of Reading Rainbow was suddenly in jeopardy. He had landed the role of Lieutenant Geordi LaForge on Star Trek The Next Generation, which was set to become another major television hit. However, it turns out that Next Generation executive producer Rick Berman had previously worked in children's programming. He cared about it so much that he made sure Burton had availability to shoot Reading Rainbow on the weekends while shooting Next Generation during the week. The icon remained with both shows right up until the end. Burton's relationship with Star Trek producers was so strong that it fostered an episode of Reading Rainbow on the Starship Enterprise.
Hi, welcome to the Starship Enterprise from the television show Star Trek The Next Generation.
The episode took viewers through a normal day on the set of Next Generation and spotlighted the many off-camera crew members who make the show happen. When you listen to testimonies from people who worked on Reading Rainbow, it's clear that everyone loved being involved. It was a combination of both the show's remarkable impact on child literacy as well as the bonds they all made behind the scenes, with Twyla Liggett telling Variety, 80% of the production team started with the show and have stayed. People do this because they want to, and it's become like a family. The show's creative team became very close, to the point that two producers, Ed Wiseman and Orly Berger, eventually married and had their kids featured on the show. In addition, many of the featured celebrity narrators refused payment or would donate their fee to charity. For them, in particular Whoopi Goldberg, participating in Reading Rainbow was a privilege.
I wanted to be part of anything that furthered this conversation about education.
Goldberg was so invested that she even went on to executive produce the Reading Rainbow-focused documentary Butterfly in the Sky. Despite the show's immense popularity, Reading Rainbow consistently struggled with fundraising. Key backers like Kellogg's and the National Science Foundation proved to be inconsistent, while public broadcasting across the board continued to lose government support. This led to temporary hiatuses in production mid-season and often between seasons. At one point, LeVar Burton was so desperate that upon accepting the show's 2003 Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Children's Series, he informed the audience that he likely wouldn't appear at the ceremony next year because the show hadn't been financed for an additional season. Naturally, the show received funding shortly after. One issue was that the show never found a way to license merchandise. Unlike shows like Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow had no distinctly identifiable characters that they could plaster on lunchboxes or fashion into dolls. This put them at a severe monetary disadvantage throughout the show's entire life cycle. In 2002, President George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act, a piece of legislation designed to enhance school curriculums and better educate disadvantaged students. Part of its monetary support was put toward reading, which would seemingly include funding for Reading Rainbow. However, the act actually stripped them of funding instead.
There was no money in the budget to foster a love of reading.
Eventually, the show filmed its final episode in 2006, and after airing reruns for 3 additional years, was officially canceled in 2009, marking the end of an over 2-decade run. In response to the uproar from older fans upset at the series' cancellation, host LeVar Burton and business partner Mark Wolf began developing a Reading Rainbow mobile app entitled Skybrary in 2012. They believed that the brand could continue encouraging children to read using modern technology. In 2014, the two announced a Kickstarter campaign with a goal of $1 million. The campaign reached its goal within 11 hours and went on to far exceed it, finishing with a final total of over $5.4 million from more than 100,000 backers. It became Kickstarter's most successful campaign at the time, and it remains one of the platform's most highly funded and highly backed campaigns to this day. As a result of its overwhelming success, the app was able to be developed for multiple platforms and made available for free to classrooms around the world. In 2011, LeVar Burton went into negotiations with the original producers of Reading Rainbow, WNED, to obtain a brand license for Skybrary. It appeared they had struck a deal, but in 2017, WNED filed a strongly worded lawsuit against Burton, claiming that the app's successful Kickstarter was a breach of their initial agreement and that the license had been revoked since 2015. WNED also claimed that Burton's later efforts to maintain the Reading Rainbow brand using his name actively took bargaining power away from the company for future projects. One example was Burton's new podcast, LeVar Burton Reads, launched in 2017. The podcast was marketed as the adult answer to Reading Rainbow and even features his trademark catchphrase,
"But you don't have to take my word for it."
WNED claimed Burton had no right to use the slogan as the party's brand license agreement had dissolved. Thankfully, later in 2017, WNED withdrew the lawsuit following a public outcry from fans who asserted that they ultimately couldn't separate Burton from the Reading Rainbow brand. Despite its cancellation and the lawsuit, the show's legacy remains untarnished. Though the official series has yet to see a proper revival, Reading Rainbow remains a favorite among the audiences who grew up with it.